my name is Whitam. I am an actor based in London, England. You presumably are some students based somewhere out in America. The reason I'm speaking to you is because I work with a company called Actors from the London Stage, or AFTLS for short. They were established in 1975 by Sir Patrick Stewart and a chap called Murph Swander. They not only produce live Shakespeare productions that tour around America, but they also have the goal of bringing Shakespeare to life in the classroom setting to enable students to experience what it is like for an actor when they start to bring Shakespeare to life. It gives you a different perspective on things. Now, I'll be honest with you, I did not love Shakespeare when I was at school. In fact, I found it utterly baffling. So many words, so many things to think about, archaic language, but actually there's so much more to it. And it's only when I started to train as an actor that it really came to life for me. What happened is that I stopped looking at Shakespeare as an academic subject to be studied and started viewing him as a playwright, as somebody who understood the human condition and could put that understanding into words and language. And it's only when you lift Shakespeare's language from the page that it really starts to come to life. And that is what we are going to do today in this workshop. Yeah, this is not a lesson. I don't want you to think of it as me lecturing you. This is a practical workshop. You are actors and you're going to be speaking some of the lines and understanding for yourself. So make sure your voices are warmed up. In this workshop, we are going to be looking at what is broadly known as verse, or let's call it Shakespeare's verse. That is the form of writing that he employed most often in his plays and in his poems. However, before we delve into all of that, I want us to start thinking of Shakespeare's verse as a script. Now, you might have come across one of Shakespeare's books of complete works, and let's be honest, it is a huge, somewhat impenetrable brick. However, Shakespeare never wrote his plays to be read. He had no idea that his works would be collected and studied. That's not why he wrote. Shakespeare, I believe, wasn't necessarily a master of the written word. He was a master of the spoken word. His plays were written to be seen and heard. They were a working manuscript for his actors. They were a blueprint for a live show. Now, something special happens when you start to speak his words out loud. They really do come to life in a way that starts to make sense. The very act of saying them aloud unlocks a deeper meaning for the listener. Shakespeare really understood the way that a word or a phrase or a perfectly placed consonant or vowel could have an effect upon a listener. To him, I think words were more than just a way of conveying narrative. They conveyed nuance, emotion. They were the key to unlocking different worlds for the listener. They were a means of transporting his audiences to different times, to different places, into the minds of characters, so that even, let's say, the lowest pauper standing at the Globe Theatre watching one of his shows could understand the intricacies of a king's soul. So in order to get the most out of this session, it's important that you try out the simple exercises that I'm going to guide you through. And it doesn't matter if you're part of a group or you're there on your own. You will get a lot more out of it, I promise. So, what do we want to get out of this workshop? Well, first of all, we want to be able to demystify verse, to explore what it is, to look at the mechanics of how it works. We want to look at that both on and off the page. We want to also look at how it helps an actor, how it informs character choices and decisions, and also how it works with the human voice. So, what is verse? Let's take a moment to examine exactly what it is. The technical term for it is iambic pentameter. Beautiful word, quite scary though as well. But put simply, all it means is that it is 10 syllables per line of text. For example, here is a sonnet written by William Shakespeare in verse. Now, you see how the lines are split up. That's not to make it look pretty on the page. It is the form which he wrote in. Take any line there, it is 10 syllables long. For example, first line, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That, my friends, quite simply, is a line of verse. Now, it is a poetic form. It has a set of rules that govern it, But personally, as an actor, I don't find it helpful to think of Shakespeare's writing as poetry. That's just my decision. I think of it more as a heightened language, that the characters are really good at expressing themselves through intricate thoughts and words. However, for an actor, there is a balance to be found. The skill lies in making a character believable while at the same time embracing the heightened language. And believe it or not, Shakespeare's verse helps out with that. Now, the next thing to know is that verse follows a really simple rhythmic pattern. And that pattern is dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. Or, to put it another way, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong. Now, what that means is that if you've got 10 syllables in the line, when you speak the line, you would speak the first syllable slightly weaker, the second stronger, and so on, so on, so on. Why does it matter? Why do we need a pattern? Well, because it helps us make sense of the line when we speak it, and it helps the listener make sense of the line when they hear it. Let's take Macbeth's very first line in the play, the very first thing that he, as a character, says. And he says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." Now, I will say the line in two different ways, and you'll hear the difference. The first way is with the pattern that I've just discussed, the dee-dum, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong. So it would sound like this: "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." Now, let's try it another way. Let's flip that pattern. So it would go strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. It would sound something like this: "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." Now, clearly, the first way of speaking it sounds much more natural. It makes much more sense to the listener when they hear it. What was I doing? I was simply following the pattern. Dee-dum, 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 or weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong. This means that every second syllable in a line of 10 syllables should be hit with just a little more strength. And it actually mirrors the way that we speak in real life. Next time you listen to a conversation, just listen to the way that people say their words, how they form their sentences, and you'll notice that there is that little bi-bum, 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 bi-bum. Not for everyone, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it does seem to do that. Try the line out for yourself. Try the different patterns, stressing random words, and then finally, go back to the pattern that I discussed. Dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. You've got 1 minute to try it out. Give it a go. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this pattern. They are rare, but they definitely exist, and Shakespeare put them in there for a reason. Let's take a line of verse that Juliet says from the play Romeo and Juliet. Now, it's at the point in the play where she's met Romeo, she's fallen madly in love with him, she's got married to him, and now she's waiting for him to arrive for a secret, clandestine nighttime meeting. And she says the line, "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds." She's trying to will time to move faster with a word. She's telling it to gallop along. Now, if we follow the pattern strictly that we just discussed, dee-dum, 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 we run into a little problem. It sounds slightly odd at the start. "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds." Now, clearly, the word is pronounced gallop. Yeah, no matter how hard you try and make it fit, it is gallop. A horse gallops, it doesn't gallop. Now this is what is known as a trochee. It means the first syllable of the word is strong and the second one is weak. Like the words garden, highway, tiger. Now, if we want to sound even remotely human when we say the line, we will have to go, gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds. Now, the trochee at the start of the line, I think actually helps the sense. To me, it mirrors the sound of horses' hooves thundering across the ground. Gallop apace, gallop apace. And so what would happen with a trochee, the start of the line is inverted, it goes strong, weak, and then it follows a normal pattern. Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds. And Shakespeare will sometimes use this to make an impact with a line. As a listener, if you get used to hearing a person's speech patterns and then all of a sudden it's disrupted, it has an effect upon you as a listener. And I think Shakespeare knew that and utilised the trochee as a device. You'll see them throughout Shakespeare's shows, normally almost always at the start of a line. And it will be obvious because it'll be really odd to pronounce it with the normal pattern. Now, another component of Shakespeare's verse is what's known as a caesura. It comes from the Latin meaning to cut. Almost every line has a caesura in it. It's usually near the centre of the line. It's a sort of rhythmical pause. Let's take a look at some examples. Macbeth's first line, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. Or Hamlet's most famous line, probably in the whole of Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question. You see, each of those lines has two parts, two sense chunks, let's call them. And what an actor does when they speak the line is that they very gently use the caesura. It's been described to me as a mid-line muscle. The line sort of peaks in the centre. There's a lift to it. To be or not to be, that is the question. It helps the listener, actually, when they hear the line, and it kind of mirrors the way that we speak in everyday life. Next time you hear a conversation, just have a listen and see if you can spot in the sentences the caesura. I promise you, people's everyday speech is littered with them. So another thing to look out for in verse is what's known as a falling ending. Some people call them a feminine ending, but I prefer the falling ending. It is a line of verse with 11 syllables, so it ends on a weak stress. A really good example is probably the most famous speech in Shakespeare, the first four lines of To Be or Not to Be with Hamlet. Let's take a look at those. So, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles. Now, they're all 11 syllables. Sometimes I think this is a conscious choice by Shakespeare. By playing with the rhythms of the line, it can point towards a character's state of mind. So, for example, Hamlet at this moment is contemplating suicide. He's in a really dark place. He's not in his normal state of mind. And I think Shakespeare has reflected that in the language by giving him these falling endings. It disrupts the pattern for the listener. It lets the listener know that, oh, something's not quite right. He's not speaking in sort of the normal pattern that he would use. And I think as an actor you should use those falling endings. I think this is all advice directly from Shakespeare. He is giving instructions to his actors. It's like the instructions are encoded into the line, and your job as an actor is to extrapolate these clues and to use them in your performance. Another device that Shakespeare uses in his verse writing is that of half lines or unfinished lines. Now these are lines of verse that aren't 10 syllables. They're 8 syllables, 5 syllables, sometimes 2 syllables. And what Shakespeare is doing there is not that he couldn't be bothered to finish the line or he couldn't think of the words. He's actually telling the actor that there is a pause here. Now, sometimes it can mean that a character is entering or exiting the stage, or a fight is happening, so there might be a half line. But if it's in the middle of a speech, it means that there is a pause. And your job as an actor is to decide why the character has paused at that moment. What is it that has stopped their flow of speaking? And that is sort of advice that he directly gives to you if you know where to look. And believe me, actors love nothing more than a dramatic pause. You see, it really helps and stuff. Here's something I learned. Shakespeare and Shakespeare plays don't have any pauses in them unless he tells you to do so. So let's take the start of Romeo and Juliet. It says, now is the 2 hours traffic of our stage. So if you were to mount a full production of Romeo and Juliet nowadays, it would take way longer than 2 hours. Now I think maybe it's for a couple of reasons. Maybe we speak a bit slower nowadays, or maybe it's because modern day performances and productions have a lot of pauses between the action, and maybe that wasn't the case. So I'm always of the opinion that if you are watching a Shakespeare play, or if you're performing Shakespeare, get on with it, say the words, unless he tells you that there is a pause. So, why did Shakespeare write in verse? What aside from the fashions of the day and the stylistic interpretations of the time, why did he choose verse? Well, the reason is, I believe, is because it mirrors human speech really well. We tend to speak in sort of 10-syllable sense chunks. So if I was to say something like, it's cold outside, make sure you wrap up warm, that is 10 syllables. It's cold outside, make sure you wrap up warm. Yeah, so that's iambic pentameter. And you'll notice when you listen to people, or you can even try it out yourself, that we tend to speak in 10-syllable chunks. So, he wrote in this way to mirror human speech. So let's take some of what we have looked at so far and see if we can put it into practice a little bit. Let's take a look at one of Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, a sonnet is a standalone poem. It consists of 14 verse lines, so each line 10 syllables, and it usually follows a really simple rhyming pattern, which is A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G, if you want to know. So we're going to use some of the things that we've looked at and see if we can bring it to life. We're going to speak it aloud. You're going to speak it aloud. And in this section, I'm going to give you time to speak through bits and to get those words into your mouths and out into the world, because that is honestly the best way for you to experience and to learn about bringing Shakespeare to life. So here is the sonnet. I'm going to read it out loud just so that we can all hear it, and then we will delve a little bit deeper into it. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of the fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wondrous in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So here's a little trick for you. Whenever you see a big block of verse by Shakespeare, whether it's in a speech or whether it's one in his poems, if you look at the last word of every line, you will get a sense of what that speech or that poem is about. So for example, in this sonnet, the last words are day, temperate, May, shines, dimmed, declines, untrimmed, fade, oast, shade, grossed. It gives us a sort of through line of the story. It lets us know what it's about. And this works because Shakespeare will always put a key word at the end of a line of verse. It's what the whole line is driving towards. And it's important that it shouldn't be brushed over. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with this is we're going to take the very first line of the sonnet, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and we're going to put the pattern that we talked about near the start of this session in place. You remember de-dum, 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 or weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong. And I really want you to put that pattern on top of those words. Really go a bit further than you normally would. Make it the pattern in bold, highlight it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So do that, make sure everybody says it out loud. If you're on your own, try it a few different times. And also try playing around with the pattern. Invert it, make it archaic, see what works. I'd be very surprised if any other pattern sounded as good as the basic one that we all work towards, but it's worth a go. This is an experiment. Okay, I'm sure you all did that absolutely marvellously, splendidly, wonderfully. Let's go a bit further now. Let's take the first 4 lines of this sonnet. Here they are. They read, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Now, what you're going to do is to locate the caesura in these lines. And you remember what I was talking about earlier? It is that moment in each line, it is the midline muscle. It's the part where the 2 sense chunks of the line join in the middle. It's the seesaw moment. I want you to chat between yourselves, come to a consensus, share your ideas and see if you can locate those moments. I'll give you the first one for free. This is where I will put the caesura in the first line. Shall I compare thee, caesura, to a summer's day? You can sort of see that it's quite obvious where that will be. And I think it probably is in the next 3 lines. But work it out. You've got 1 minute. Have a go. Okay, did you locate them? I've no idea because I can't hear you, but I'm going to tell you where I think they are. So, here they go. Shall I compare thee, caesura, to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely, caesura, and more temperate. Rough winds do shake, caesura, the darling buds of May, and summer's lease, caesura, hath all too short a date. Now, what I want you to do, now we've located the caesura, now we've talked about the pattern, you're going to say the first 4 lines of that sonnet out loud. You're going to use the pattern and you're going to put that caesura moment in, that little lift in the middle before you travel on to the end of the line. Off you go. Okay, so now we are building on this. We have the pattern, we have the caesura. What are we going to do next, I hear you ask? I can't hear you asking that, but I've imagined you've asked it. We are going to lift the final word in each line of verse. Remember, I said just before how you can work out what a poem is about, what a line of speech is about from the last words in each line. So the reason for that is because they're important words in the speech. And as an actor and as a listener, it is really helpful if you throw that last word up so that it pings in a listener's ear. So, for example, I'll do the first line. I will make sure that the pattern is on point. I will add the caesura, and I will throw that last word up. Here we go. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So I went a bit over the top there. That's fine. Go a bit over the top because it's always easier to bring stuff back. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those first 4 lines. You're going to do the pattern, the caesura, and you're going to throw that last word up. And here's something I want you to do. It might look a bit weird, but trust me, it helps. When you say that final word, you're going to get it into your body. You're going to throw an imaginary ball up into the air. So I would go, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And what it does is it lifts your intonation up a little bit. And it will help you remember. So when I'm going through lines, if I'm learning lines of verse, I will throw a tennis ball up into the air at the end of every line, and it helps me to learn where the line endings are, because that's really important. It's your turn. Give it a go. Give those 4 lines a go with those 3 things that we've discussed. Okay, we have looked at some of the technical aspects of bringing verse to life. We've taken a look at the pattern, the caesura, and the line endings. But how does an actor go around really imbuing those words with life? How do you make it sound like a human being is speaking those words? Well, there's a really simple secret weapon that actors use. It is known as intention. Now, you have probably heard in a movie or something the phrase an actor might use, which would go something like, what's my motivation? What's my motivation for this scene? I need to get into the head of my character. But actually what that really means is they are asking for the intention. So, what is an intention? Well, in everyday life, whenever you speak to anybody, you are always trying to do something to the listener. So whether you're having just a very quick chat with somebody or you're having a deep heart-to-heart, whether you realise it or not, you, when speaking to them, are trying to have an effect upon them in some way. So, for example, right now, I am trying to teach you. My intention is to teach. It is to share knowledge. So that changes the way I say things. I speak a little bit clearer. I try not to and ah too much, although I'm probably failing at that. Right there. I also am speaking and thinking at the same time and trying to keep a flow to my words. That is my intention. It's to teach you. It's to be as clear as possible. So what you are going to do now is you're going to take those first 4 lines. You're going to keep playing with the pattern, with the caesura, and with the line endings. But now you're going to add an intention behind those lines. So keep to the first 4. I'll give you 4 intentions to choose from. So you're either going to tempt somebody with those lines, you're going to scare them, you're going to calm them down, or You're going to teach them. So I would recommend that you don't tell anybody else what your intention is going to be. Practice those lines on your own and then go around and share them with each other and see if the other people in your group can guess what your intention was. And I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Right, we have taken a look at some of the technical aspects. We've taken a look at the rhythm, the caesura, the line endings, and we've looked at intention as well. Now let's take what we've done so far and what we've learnt about verse, and let's apply it to a character. Let's try and bring a character to life. Let's have a look at something. Let's take a look at Macbeth. Now, Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's tragedies, and what that means is at the end a lot of people die, unlike a comedy where a lot of people get married at the end. That's not the only thing that defines them, but you'll find that that's what usually happens. Macbeth tells the story of a Scottish general. He meets 3 witches on a heath after a battle, and they tell him a prophecy that he is going to be the King of Scotland. Now, it leads to a murderous spree and the eventual unravelling of himself. Everybody he loves and the whole country. It's an absolute favourite of mine. It's a really glorious play. It has one main storyline throughout as well. Unlike some of other Shakespeare's tragedies, which have 2 or 3 sort of different story strands, Macbeth just has the one. It's his roller coaster of a downfall, and it gives the whole play a real pace, which some of the other plays lack, and I really like that. It plunges the audience really quickly into the world, and it doesn't let up until its dramatic and pretty horrific conclusion. So Macbeth is a really interesting character. As with all of Shakespeare's plays, there are options with Macbeth. Is he a bloodthirsty tyrant, or has he been swayed by supernatural forces? Is he the dominant one in his relationship with his wife, or is it the other way around? It's a really interesting, multifaceted character. So let's take a look at one of his speeches. So the speech of Macbeth's that we are going to be looking at is actually what's known as a soliloquy. Now, you may or may not have heard that word before, but what does it mean? What is the difference between a soliloquy and a speech or a monologue, for example? Well, a soliloquy comes from the Latin words solus, which means alone, and loqui, which means to speak alone. And that is exactly what a character is doing during a soliloquy. They speak their thoughts with nobody else on stage present with them, no other characters. They are alone. Now, as an audience member, it's not that interesting to watch a character speak to themselves for a few minutes, and rightly so. But that is not what is happening during a soliloquy. What's actually happening is that the character is speaking directly to the audience. They are treating the audience as though they are part of themselves. The audience are aspects of their own mind, of their ego, of their soul, and they are sharing their thoughts out loud with the audience, trying to work through them, trying to solve whatever problem it is, whatever has caused them to speak aloud with the audience. It's actually a really clever device that Shakespeare employs. It makes it so much more engaging, and what it does is it ingratiates the audience with the character, so that even villains like Iago, like Richard III, like Macbeth, people who have committed terrible acts, horrible choices, really terrible people, even those characters are ingratiated with the audience. You feel complicit with them because they have shared their thoughts with you directly. So it's a really clever way of getting an audience to root for a character. It's also important to note that when a character speaks a soliloquy, they are always telling the truth. They have no need to lie to an audience. They don't, because it's a moment of absolute truth. So you might have seen a character lying, conniving with other characters on stage. However, when it's just with the audience, it's the truth. So the speech that we're going to look at of Macbeth's is a soliloquy. So Macbeth has a few soliloquies throughout the play, but the one that we're going to look at happens relatively late on in the action, towards the final act. So what's happened up to now? Macbeth has been told the prophecy. He's killed the king. He has had his best friend, Banquo, slaughtered, left in a ditch. He has seen various ghosts and visions. He hasn't slept for weeks. He's had the wife and children of another thane or lord killed. His country is in pieces. People are fleeing. There's an English army approaching his castle. They're intent on overthrowing him and cutting off his head, probably. It's all going terribly. And then to add to that, his last remaining sort of servant brings some news to him. They tell him, the Queen, my lord, is dead. So his wife has just died. And people say that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have the happiest marriage out of all Shakespeare's marriages. I don't know, that's up for debate, but it's devastating. His response is absolutely extraordinary. It is a man looking into the abyss, into the infinite darkness of having this realization that everything we do in life amounts to nothing, that it's a fool's journey, that nothing really matters at the end. It is a dark and bleak worldview, and he gives it directly to the audience. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at that, and then we will start to add some of the things that we've talked about, break it down, and see if we can both bring this to life. So what I will do is read through it. We can discuss briefly what the meaning of it is so that we're all on the same page with it. And then what we'll do is start to use some of the things that we've learned to try and bring it to life, to look at the choices that Shakespeare has given us in the verse. Okay, so remember at the start, before the speech, immediately before, his servant has just come to him and said, the Queen, my lord, is dead. And this is his response. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So, that's the speech. What is he talking about? So, he's just found out his wife is dead, and his instant reply is, she should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word, tomorrow. So she should have died another time, and that time is tomorrow. And then he's got that line, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And that's a really interesting line. There's a segue into the sort of next part of the speech. There's a bridge of thought which propels us on to this next bit. And what does he say? He says, tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. There is, the petty pace of life plods on until you die. It's this sort of monotony, this grey misery. And then you die at the end. And he goes on to say, in all our yesterdays, everything that happened before this time has lighted fools the way to dusty death. Everybody before has done exactly the same, and they've died. They're idiots. They die at the end. And then he says this little metaphor, out, brief candle. I suppose it's something quite poetic there, right in the middle. Talks about, a candle being snuffed out, and that's a metaphor that I think everybody can understand. The sort of, you've got something burning bright, and then all of a sudden, it's gone into the air. And he says life's but a walking shadow. Life it's not even dimensional, it's just the shadow of something. It's not even the real thing. It's a walking shadow, it's a poor player. Now, a player was an actor, so he's referring to actors here, but it's a poor player that struts and frets his hour up on the stage, and then is heard no more. So somebody walks around, struts about, and gets angry, and then nobody's ever heard of them a few years later. it's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but at the end of it all, it signifies absolutely nothing. So that's his reply. Now, let's take a look at the speech in more detail. Let's have a look at some of the things we've talked about so far, see if we can put them into practice and bring this speech to life. Okay, so let's break this down. Let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. Let's take the first line. So remember, his servant says to him, "The queen, my lord, is dead," and his reply is, "She should have died hereafter." Now, what do we notice about that line straight away? It is not 10 syllables, it's 7, I believe. She should have died hereafter. What does that mean? It means there's a pause. The actor can take a pause, one of those magical moments. Shakespeare has written it into the verse for you. He wants you to take a pause. Now there's a choice. Do you, A, pause before you reply, or B, does he hear the news, reply straight away, and then pause before carrying on? So the options would be, "The queen, my lord, is dead." "She should have died hereafter." Or B, "The queen, my lord, is dead. She should have died hereafter." There would have been a time for such a word. So you've got a choice there. What I want you to do is get together, have a chat about it, throw the ideas around. Would you pause before? Would you pause after? And why would you make that choice? Have a go. Okay, I'm sure you've come up with loads of wonderful ideas as to why it's either before or after. And here's the thing, none of them are wrong. It's always down to your interpretation. That's why Shakespeare can be performed so many times in so many different ways, because it is open to interpretation. So let's take a look at the next line. So he said, "She should have died hereafter." And then he says, "There would have been a time for such a word." What do we notice about that line? Well, it's a regular verse line. We're up to 10 syllables, the full 10. There would have been a time for such a word. So, what do we do next? We go, where's the caesura moment? Remember that midline moment? I think in this one, it's quite obvious. It's there would have been a time for such a word. And it's interesting that Shakespeare puts the caesura on the word time, because that, I think, is a theme, a running theme of this speech. And actually, through the whole play of Macbeth, time always sort of pops up again and again. But particularly in this speech, he talks about tomorrow, he talks about yesterdays, he talks about life sort of frittering away over time. So that's a really key word. And Shakespeare's telling us that's an important word. Speak it out loud. It's what I would say is a keystone word of the speech. And what I mean by that is usually in every line of verse, there is a word that if you ping it out a little bit more, the audience will understand the speech that much clearer, I think. And we do that in everyday life. We emphasize words that we want people to hear, like I just did, good example. So you've got that line. And then we come to an interesting line, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Now, it's a regular verse line. It is just 2 words repeated, tomorrow and the word and. Why does Shakespeare make this choice? What is he doing? If you lean into the rhythm, the dee-dum, 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 what happens? It does something to the voice. It does something to the words. So I want you now to take a minute and lean into the rhythm and say that line, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and discuss how it feels to you. What would your mental state be like if you said those words like that? Off you go. Okay, so we've looked at the first three lines. She should have died hereafter. There is a pause somewhere in that line. You decide where it is. There would have been a time for such a word. We make sure we ping out that word time. And then we've got the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, which we use the rhythm to sort of bring it to life. Now, a little caveat on that. There is a phrase that you'll hear a lot in a rehearsal room or a drama school, and it is called thinking on the line. Now, this is really, really useful for Shakespeare. What it means basically is it mirrors what we do in everyday speech. When we have a conversation, when we're chatting to somebody, we are thinking as we speak. We are coming up with the words as we say them. We're having realizations in real time. Very rarely will we plan exactly what we are going to say before we say it. And this helps with Shakespeare. And it would help with the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow line. If we really think on the line, if Macbeth in that moment doesn't know what he's going to say next, but it is the same word, it imbues it with something. So if you just said it in a monotonous fashion, like you planned it, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, it's not very engaging for an audience, right? However, if you really think on the line, and you see him realise, as he says it, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, it starts to become alive in a little, in a bigger way, actually, not a little way. Moving on to the next line. So this is an interesting one, and this is something I haven't talked to you about yet. He says, creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Regular verse line, but what do we notice about it? For me, I notice the fact that it is mainly comprised of single syllable words. And what that means is that Shakespeare is telling you to slow the line down. Don't rush through it. How do I know that? Well, because it's very hard to speak single syllable words quickly. It requires diction. And sort of fast thought. And actually what this line is about, it's about the petty pace of life. So Shakespeare has woven a sort of stage direction for an actor into the verse by making it a single syllable line. Try it out for yourselves. Take that line, creeps in this petty pace from day to day, and try it at different speeds. See which one it works best at. It might be you discover, actually I can say it quickly and it's fine. But for me, it is Shakespeare telling us to take our time when we say the line. But give it a go. You've got 1 minute. Okay, so we've got those first four lines. We've got she should have died hereafter, which has got a pause, either before or after. There would have been a time for such a word. We're going to punch out the word time because that's an important key word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. We're thinking on the line. We're imbuing each of those words with something different and a realisation as he's saying it. And then we've got creeps in this petty pace from day to day. We've got that single syllable regular line, which means we should slow it down a little bit. Now this next line is an interesting one. It can be a tricky one actually. The line is, to the last syllable of recorded time. Now, let's count the syllables of it. To the last syllable of recorded time. It's a falling ending. It's got 11 syllables in the line. It's also odd if you lean into the pattern, the rhythm that we talked about earlier. To the last syllable of recorded time. It starts to mess up towards the end. It goes slightly odd and you end up sounding like an unusual robot, let's say. So the job of the actor is to go, what do I do? How do I solve this line? What's happening here? And Shakespeare hasn't done it by mistake. He's not all of a sudden forgotten how to write in the rhythm. He's done it for a reason, and it's our job to work out what that is. So what I would do is, what is known as syncopate the line. You at some point want to, by the end of it, get it into a regular rhythm towards the end. And the way that you would do that, I think, is to drive towards the caesura at the start, to pick up the pace, to drive towards that word syllable, which is where I think the caesura is. So, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. So when you do that, the latter half of the line becomes sort of regular again, but the first half is disrupted. And that is Shakespeare weaving that choice for the actor into the text again. So let's move on to the next two lines, which is, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools, the way to dusty death, out, out, brief candle. Now, this is an interesting one. The first line, it's regular verse. We're back to that sort of regular verse, but the caesural moment, Shakespeare has put up the word yesterday, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools. He's telling us to ping that word out. It's the theme of time again, and he wants us to hammer that home to the audience because that is a sort of running theme of this speech. Now the second line is interesting because the first half of it finishes the thought from the previous line, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools, the way to dusty death. And then there's a full stop right in the centre of the line. Why has Shakespeare done this? Is it because he couldn't think of the words to finish it off? No. What's happened is he has once again woven something into the fabric of the verse. He is telling the actor, look, Macbeth is in a bad state of mind. He hasn't slept for weeks. He's got an army attacking him. He is not finishing his thoughts neatly. He is saying one thing, and then before that's even finished, he's on to the next thing. So as an actor, what it would say to me is that his thought pattern is kind of broken up, and you should lean into that and use that. Remember what I said, that there are no pauses in Shakespeare, and there definitely aren't in the middle of a line. You continue that on. So if you're forced to go straight into that next thought very quickly, it does something. It gives you an indication of the character. So for example, I would go, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools, the way to dusty death, out, out, brief candle. So you see, Shakespeare has, as I said, given us that little gift and said, look, Macbeth's in a bad state of mind, I'm going to write that into the verse to help you out. And that's exactly what he's done. So we've got the candle metaphor. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player. So we look at that little line, or that little exchange of lines. We've got an antithesis in there, candle and shadow. Now, I would argue that they are opposite sides of the spectrum. A candle gives off light, a shadow, by its very definition, is the absence of light. And as an actor, you're looking for these antithesis words, these counterpoises in the speech, and you pin those out because they help an audience understand the argument, they understand the thrust of what the speech is about when you pluck those moments out. So Shakespeare has given you those words. It is a gift. He is saying, say these words, ping these out, because an audience will understand. So moving on, the thought develops into a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. What do we notice about those lines? Well, they are comprised predominantly of single syllable words. What does that mean? It means we slow the thought down. So we've gone from out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's quite a meta moment as well, because obviously the person playing Macbeth is an actor, and he is strutting and fretting, probably, upon the stage. So that would not have been lost on the audience. Also, notice the last part of that thought, the final line, and then is heard no more, full stop, it is a tale. So again, we have a broken line that has two thoughts in there. Shakespeare is once again alluding to sort of the broken thought patterns of Macbeth. Okay, let's move on to the final thought of the speech. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So at the start we have that half line that thought starts on a previous line, so we know we're going to continue with it quite quickly. However, the final line of it, signifying nothing, what do we notice about it? That's right, it is not the full 10 syllables, signifying nothing. So, Shakespeare has given us, bless him, a pause. Your choice as an actor is to decide, does that pause come in before he says those final two words, or does he say those final two words and then there's a pause before the action? Now for me, my personal opinion, I think this whole speech has been driving towards these last two words, signifying nothing. If you could boil that whole speech down, that's basically what he's saying. Nothing matters. It signifies nothing. Life is about nothing. And so I would think that actually to take a little pause before you say those final two words is an interesting choice. So it would go, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Everything I've talked about during this speech, the way I've broken it down, is my humble opinion. People are more than welcome to differ with it. That's absolutely fine, and that's what makes performing Shakespeare so glorious, that there are loads of different options. However, these are just things that I have found helpful, and I hope it's opened up a little bit more about it for you too. So we are at the end of the verse workshop, but let's take a quick look at what we've looked at so far. So we took a look at verse structure. We've identified that in regular verse there are 10 syllables per line, and also that their lines have a rhythm to them, the de-dum, 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 de-dum. We also discovered that lines have a caesura, a moment in the middle where the line sort of counterpoises and two sense chunks meet. We also looked at falling endings, lines that have more than 10 syllables and what that might mean. We also took a look at half lines, points where Shakespeare has given the actor a moment to pause. Also syncopation, where we've had to make the line make sense to play around with the rhythm. Antithesis of words, so finding those words that are directly opposite to each other and punching those out. We've looked at the ends of lines and how important the words are at the end of a line. We've also looked at the pace and how Shakespeare can dictate the pace at which an actor speaks the lines. So remember, when you are studying Shakespeare, if you can, read it out loud. It really starts to bring it to life. And I hope that this has demystified verse for you. And if you ever want to chat further, you can reach me on Twitter, Jack_Whitam. I am always happy to geek out about Shakespeare. And in the words of Shakespeare, it is a grief too brief to part from thee. Farewell.